They weren't just raiders or bearded brutes swinging axes for fun. The Vikings were terrifyingly strategic, deadly, and relentless in their pursuit of dominance. But out of all the chaos they caused across Europe, what was the deadliest weapon they wielded? To understand it, we need to look beyond the myths and into the blood-soaked reality of Viking warfare. Not the Hollywood version, but the calculated brutality that left entire kingdoms trembling. The Vikings terrorized coastal villages, launched deep inland raids, and outmaneuvered more established armies. But they didn't just rely on brute force. They used weapons specifically designed to overwhelm, mutilate, and dominate. While swords, axes, and spears were common, one weapon stood out for its psychological and physical devastation. A weapon so deeply embedded in Viking culture that it became a symbol of power, fear, and death. But to appreciate why this weapon was so deadly, we need to first understand the Viking warrior mindset and the environment unified nation. They were seafaring Norse warriors from modern-day Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. They lived in a world of harsh winters, constant feuds, and tribal warfare. Strength wasn't optional, it was survival. Young boys were taught how to fight from a young age, trained with wooden weapons until they could handle the real thing. Raiding was more than just a way to get rich. It was a rite of passage. The brutality of Viking society meant that only the fiercest could rise. That's where the Viking axe, specifically the Dane axe, comes in. Long, terrifyingly sharp, and surprisingly light, the Dane axe was the Viking equivalent of a sniper rifle in close combat. Wielded by elite warriors known as berserkers or huskarls, it could split helmets, shatter shields, and even decapitate in a single swing. Unlike the clunky Hollywood axes, real Viking axes had thin blades that were razor-sharp and weighted for speed. The hafts were long, sometimes over 4 feet, allowing warriors to generate immense power while keeping enemies at a distance. It wasn't just a weapon. Imagine standing in a shield wall, the air thick with the stench of sweat and iron. Then you see a Viking warrior charging, shirtless, screaming, eyes wide in bloodlust, swinging a weapon longer than your arm with deadly precision. This wasn't just fear, it was psychological warfare. Berserkers, the elite shock troops of Viking raids, often carried Dane axes. They were believed to fight in a trance-like fury, some even claiming they were possessed by animal spirits. Whether myth or reality, facing a berserker with a Dane axe was enough to break enemy lines before the real battle even began. But it wasn't just for one-on-one combat. In battles against heavily armored foes, like Anglo-Saxon or Frankish knights, the Dane axe became a night killer. It could hook behind shields, sever limbs, and slice through armor with a downward arc. The leverage from its length meant it could even break bones under chainmail. When used in formation by Viking huskarls, it turned flanks into graveyards, and its elegance in that eventually became so respected that even Viking enemies adopted it. The English housecarls used it in the Battle of Hastings. Norse warriors serving in the Byzantine Empire's Varangian Guard brought it to Constantinople. It was a weapon that transcended culture because it worked. But it wasn't just the blade that made the Dane axe deadly. It was how Vikings used it, with tactics, teamwork, and terrifying aggression. They'd strike at dawn, when their enemies were half asleep. They'd fake retreats to lure foes into traps, and they'd use their longships to appear out of nowhere, bringing steel and fire with them. The Dane axe was ideal for these hit-and-run assaults and open-field battles alike. In narrow village streets or open meadows, it dominated. Quick to swing, hard to block, and harder to recover from once it struck. Many Viking raids ended before the first blow landed, because the fear of facing that weapon and the warrior behind it was enough to make defenders became a symbol of Viking power. Carved into rune stones, described in sagas, and buried with warriors, it wasn't just practical, it was spiritual. To carry one meant you were a warrior of stature. To be buried with one meant you were worthy of honor. And unlike swords, which were expensive and often ceremonial, axes were accessible. Nearly every Viking had one, but the Dane axe was the elite's blade of choice. It was precision over brutality, skill over chaos. It told the world, I don't just fight, I win. Even today, it captures the imagination. Museums display preserved examples, and reenactors still demonstrate its brutal efficiency. But no replica can capture the raw terror it once inspired on real battlefields, under gray Nordic skies, surrounded by the scum legendary by accident. They chose their weapons carefully, not just for the kill, but for the fear they could sow. And no weapon captured that intent more than the Dane axe. It wasn't just sharp, it was efficient, it was psychological, it was Viking. So the next time you picture a Viking raid, the flames, the panic, the thunder of boots on wet soil, remember what came crashing down in the middle of it all. A flash of iron, a warrior's roar, and the deadly arc of a weapon designed to break more than just bone. This was more than a tool. It was the executioner's swing, and it earned its place as the deadliest weapon the Vikings ever used. If you enjoyed this story and want to dive into more ancient warrior cultures and the weapons that defined them, like the Aztecs or samurai, don't forget to subscribe, like, and tell us in the comments which warrior you'd want at your side in battle.